The day I brought home my brand new car, I felt like nothing could ruin my happiness. I had worked years to save enough for it, carefully setting aside every spare dollar. When the keys touched my hand, it wasn't just a career, it was proof of my hard work, my patience, and my dream finally becoming real. The sleek body gleamed in the sunlight, the fresh leather smell filled my lungs, and I couldn't stop smiling. But my happiness didn't last long. The Karen sisters, two neighbors who had made my life miserable with their constant complaints, gossip, and entitled demands, were waiting like vultures. They had already nagged about my shiny car in the driveway, saying it blocked their view. I laughed it off, thinking they were just being their usual bitter selves. I had no idea what they were about to do next. It happened so fast. One morning I stepped outside to find the horror. My windshield shattered, the paint keyed into ugly scratches, and the tires slashed flat. The car I had dreamed about for years was destroyed overnight. My heart sank, my hands shook, and rage boiled inside me. At first, I thought about calling the police, but then I saw the sisters smirking from their porch, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. That smirk lit a fire inside me. They thought they had one. They thought I would cry, fix it, and let them walk free. But they had no idea I wasn't going to stay silent. What I did next turned their smug smiles into shock, fear, and regret. Instantly. The day I bought my new car, the sky seemed brighter than usual. It wasn't just another day, it was the day my years of hard work finally showed itself in something real, something I could touch, sit inside, and call mine. The dealership smelled faintly of polish and coffee as the salesman handed me the keys with a congratulatory grin. My heart raced as the cold metal rested in my palm. For a long moment, I didn't even move. I just stared at those keys like they were some kind of treasure. And to me, they were. I had worked extra hours at my job, skipped vacations, eaten instant noodles more times than I cared to count, and ignored every temptation to spend recklessly. While my friends bragged about expensive clothes or weekend trips, I kept my eyes on the bigger picture. And now, that bigger picture sat waiting for me outside the glass doors of the dealership, a sleek metallic silver car with sharp curves that looked alive under the sunlight. The moment I opened the door and sat in the driver's seat, I felt transformed. The leather hugged me with its newness, the dashboard glowed like a cockpit, and when I started the engine, the deep purr made my chest vibrate. I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I just sat there for a while, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the smell, smiling to myself like a fool who had finally won. By the time I pulled into my neighborhood, I felt like a king returning to his castle. The car slid smoothly down the familiar street, drawing a few curious looks from neighbors watering lawns or walking dogs. I didn't mind the attention. For once, I wanted people to see the result of my discipline, my patience, my grind. But not everyone shared my joy. The moment I turned into my driveway, I spotted them, the Karen sisters. They lived directly across from me in a slightly run-down beige house with peeling paint and a lawn that looked like it hadn't seen a mower in months. The two of them were standing on their porch, sipping from oversized mugs and squinting at me as if my very existence annoyed them. They were infamous in the neighborhood, known for their loud complaints and endless gossip. Mrs. Wilkins next door once told me the sisters had called animal control on her because her dog barked at the mailman. Another neighbor had warned me that they reported kids for making too much noise when they played basketball after school. And now, their sharp eyes had locked onto me and my car. I tried not to care. I parked carefully in my driveway, cut the engine, and stepped out with the kind of pride that made my chest expand. I expected maybe a nod or a polite comment. Instead, one of the sisters, tall, thin, with a tight bun pulling at her forehead, snorted loudly enough for me to hear across the street. "Nice toy," she muttered to the other, the shorter one. Rounder and always draped in floral patterns, tilted her head, squinting at my car like it was some kind of a fence blocking the view. "Isn't it?" she said, sipping her coffee. I felt my smile falter. It wasn't the first time they'd made snide remarks, but this time, on this day, it stung more than usual. I wanted to respond, to fire back something clever, but I reminded myself of the car, of why I had bought it. I wasn't going to let them ruin this, so I ignored them, walked around the car one more time to admire its shine, and went inside. But as the days passed, the sisters' bitterness became impossible to ignore. Every time I came home from work, they were there on their porch whispering to each other, sometimes laughing while glancing at me. Once, I overheard the taller one complain to another neighbor about how I was showing off. Another time, the shorter one yelled across the street that I should park somewhere less distracting. I tried brushing it off. Cars attract attention, I told myself. Maybe they're just jealous, but jealousy can be dangerous. One evening I was washing my car in the driveway, humming to myself as the soap bubbled under my sponge. I noticed the sisters standing closer to their porch railing than usual, staring openly. Their eyes followed every motion of my hand, their expressions sharp with something darker than curiosity. "You really think that thing makes you special?" the tall one suddenly called out. I froze, sponge dripping suds onto the concrete. "Excuse me, you heard me," she said, smirking. Some people don't need to wave their money around to feel important. My jaw tightened. I worked hard for this car. I'm not waving anything around. The shorter one let out a fake laugh. Sure. Just remember, not everyone wants to see your shiny toy in front of their house every day. They turned back inside, shutting the door with a slam that echoed across the street. I stood there in silence. The joy of washing my car drained away, replaced by an uneasy feeling in my chest. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, their words replaying in my mind. I told myself they were just bitter, that they couldn't take away what this car meant to me. But somewhere deep inside, a small whisper warned me, this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to find footprints on the edge of my driveway, muddy, messy, leading dangerously close to my car. My stomach dropped as I crouched to inspect them. Nothing seemed damaged yet, but the message was clear. They had been near it, too near. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it could have been kids or maybe the mailman, but my gut told me otherwise. As I drove to work that morning, gripping the wheel tighter than usual, I realized something chilling. The Karen sisters weren't just annoyed, they were watching me, waiting, and deep down, I knew they were planning something far worse than nasty words or smug looks. The morning started quietly, almost too quietly. The sun rose like a glowing coin behind a blanket of pale clouds, casting the neighborhood in a dull silvery light. I brewed my coffee, pulled back the curtains, and let the steam warm my face. For once, I felt calm. The unease from the Karen sisters had faded a little overnight, and I told myself I was being paranoid. People like them loved to bark but rarely bit. Right. I sipped the coffee slowly, enjoying the bitter taste, when something outside caught my eye. At first I thought my vision was blurred by the window pane, but as I leaned closer, my heart began to pound. My car, the car I had fought for, saved for, dreamed about, looked wrong. I didn't even put my mug down. It slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor as I bolted out the front door in my slippers. The closer I ran, the clearer the nightmare became. The windshield was shattered, jagged cracks spiderwebbing across the glass. The hood had been gouged with deep, ugly scratches, random swirls, angry slashes, like someone had used a key or a knife. The tires sagged flat against the ground, slashed open and useless. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen, chest heaving, eyes wide in disbelief. My dream car looked like it had been dragged through a war zone. I felt my throat tighten as though someone had reached in and gripped it. My hands shook as I reached out to touch the destroyed paint, my fingertips catching on the sharp edges of the scratches. God, I whispered to myself, barely able to breathe. The sound of laughter broke my trance. I turned sharply, and there they were, the Karen sisters, sitting on their porch in their robes, holding steaming mugs, watching me as if my misery was their morning entertainment. The taller one leaned forward, resting her chin on her palm, her lips curled in a smug smile. The shorter one actually chuckled, sipping her coffee like she was at a comedy show. Rough morning, the tall one called out sweetly, her voice dripping with venom. My jaw locked. My heart was slamming against my ribs, torn between fury and despair. For a second, I thought about storming across the street, demanding answers, screaming in their faces. But their smirks told me everything I needed to know. They wanted me to react. They wanted me to explode so they could play the victim later. I clenched my fists so hard, my nails dug into my palms. You think this is funny? I finally shouted, my voice raw with emotion. The shorter sister tilted her head, feigning innocence. Funny? Oh no, dear, tragic, absolutely tragic. Then she laughed again. A couple of neighbors had started to gather at their windows, some even stepping out onto their lawns. I heard whispers, gasps, one woman covering her mouth in shock. My humiliation grew heavier by the second. Everyone was watching me crumble. I wanted to call the police immediately, but I stopped myself. The sisters were clever. They would deny everything. And without proof, it would be my word against theirs. They would twist it, maybe even accuse me of harassment. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started snapping photos of the damage. My hands still trembling, I wanted every detail captured, every cut, every broken piece. The sisters watched me, the whole time, whispering to each other like gossiping crows. When I finally stepped back inside my house, I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. My chest ached, my throat burned, and tears stung my eyes. This wasn't just vandalism, it was personal. They had reached into my life, ripped out the one thing that symbolized my years of sacrifice, and crushed it. I sat there for what felt like hours, numb, unable to move. The smell of coffee still lingered faintly in the air from my shattered mug, but now it made my stomach churn. My mind replayed the scene over and over, their smirks, their laughter, the broken glass glinting like cruel diamonds in the morning light. Finally, anger started to replace the numbness. Hot, pulsing, undeniable anger. I couldn't just sit here and cry while they sipped coffee like queens of cruelty. I had to be smart. I had to think. That evening I forced myself outside. Again, the car sat wounded in the driveway, a painful reminder of their hate. Neighbors passed by, offering sympathetic looks and quiet words of support. One older man even muttered, "Those sisters have gone too far this time." His words lit a spark inside me this time that meant I wasn't the only victim. Others had suffered their wrath too. Maybe no one had taken a stand yet, but that didn't mean I couldn't. I spent the next few hours researching cameras on my laptop, motion sensors, night vision, cloud storage, the whole lot. If they thought they could get away with this, they were dead wrong. I was going to catch them. By the time night fell, I had made my decision. Tomorrow I would install hidden cameras around my driveway. Not flashy ones they could see and destroy, small discreet ones. Eyes they wouldn't notice until it was too late. As I locked my front door and glanced one last time at my ruined car, the sisters' porch light flicked on. I saw their silhouettes moving behind the curtains, shadows laughing, pointing. My stomach tightened, but I didn't look away. Enjoy it while it lasts, I whispered to myself, because deep down I knew something had shifted. The balance of power was tilting, and soon their smug grins would vanish. The horror of that morning had shaken me to my core, but it had also ignited something stronger, resolve, and I promised myself as I climbed into bed that night that the next move would be mine. The next morning I woke up with a plan. The rage from yesterday had cooled into something sharper: determination. I wasn't going to scream at the Karen sisters. I wasn't going to throw accusations without proof. I was going to outsmart them, and I was going to do it in a way they couldn't weasel out of. After breakfast, I drove to a nearby electronics store, my old beat-up sedan carrying me this time. Walking through the aisles of gadgets, I felt a renewed sense of focus. I studied rows of security cameras, weighing their features, imagining how each one could help me catch the sisters in the act. Finally, I chose a set of compact wireless cameras with motion sensors and night vision. They were small enough to stay hidden, and powerful enough to record everything. By the time I returned home, my hands itched to get started. I spent hours installing the cameras with meticulous care. One went on the garage corner, another near the porch light, and a third disguised inside a flower pot facing the driveway. I tested each one from my phone, grinning when I saw the crisp, live feed of my house. No angle was left uncovered. If the sisters even stepped near my car again, I would know. That night, I lay in bed staring at the glowing screen on my phone. The cameras hummed silently. Watching every creak of the house made me sit up, checking the live feed again. Hours passed before I finally drifted into uneasy sleep, my phone clutched in my hand. The first few days passed without incident. The sisters still lingered on their porch, whispering and smirking, but they didn't approach my driveway. I started to wonder if maybe the destruction of my car had been their grand finale. Maybe they were satisfied with the damage they had done. A part of me hoped they would stay away, but a bigger part knew them too well. People like that didn't just stop. They thrived on control, on cruelty, and sure enough, it happened on the 5th night. I was half asleep when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. My eyes snapped open instantly. Heart pounding, I fumbled for the screen and opened the camera feed. There they were, the Karen sisters, dressed in dark coats despite the warm evening, creeping across the street like shadows. The taller one carried something long and sharp, maybe a crowbar, maybe a metal rod. The shorter one had a flashlight, though she kept it low, glancing nervously around. My breath caught as I watched them approach my car with the confidence of predators returning to familiar prey. The taller sister raised the object and slammed it against the car door. The metallic clang echoed faintly through the microphone, making me flinch. The shorter one giggled, shining her light across the scratches they were making, as if admiring a piece of art. I sat up in bed, trembling with fury. For a split second, I wanted to rush outside and catch them right then and there, but my brain screamed at me, wait, let them finish, get everything. So I stayed frozen, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. The taller one leaned closer to the car, whispering something I barely caught through the microphone. That'll teach him to show off. The shorter one replied, her voice smug and cruel. Tomorrow morning, he's going to cry again. I stared at their faces, illuminated briefly by the flashlight's smirks. Satisfaction, no shame, no hesitation. It was like watching two villains in a movie, but this wasn't fiction. This was my life, my car, my hard work being ripped apart by the worst people I had ever met. Finally, after carving a few more scratches and giving one last kick to the tire, they scurried back across the street, disappearing into their house like rats. I exhaled shakily, realizing I'd been holding my breath the entire time. The video was perfect, clear, undeniable proof. Their faces, their voices, their actions, every second captured in crisp detail. My chest filled with a mix of triumph and relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had power. The next morning I checked the footage again, over and over. Each time I watched it, I felt stronger. The helplessness that had haunted me since I first saw my ruined car began to fade. Now I had evidence. Evidence they couldn't deny, twist, or laugh off. When I stepped outside later that morning, the sisters were on their porch again, sipping coffee like always. Their faces wore the same smugness as before, like they had a private joke I wasn't part of. I looked straight at them, but instead of anger, I let a slow smile spread across my face. It threw them off. The taller one frowned slightly. The shorter one whispered something under her breath. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, turned, and went back inside, because now I wasn't the victim anymore. That afternoon, I transferred the footage to a secure drive, saved copies to the cloud, and even backed it up on a USB stick. I wasn't taking any chances. Then, with my heart hammering in anticipation, I dialed the police. The officer who arrived later listened carefully as I explained the situation. When I handed over the footage, his eyebrows rose. He watched the sisters vandalizing my car, shaking his head in disbelief. "This," he said firmly, "is more than enough." Hearing those words felt like music. For so long I had felt powerless against their cruelty, but now the law was on my side. The officer promised immediate action, and I knew the sisters' smug empire was about to crumble. That night, I sat in the darkened living room, watching the glow of my phone screen again. The cameras still fed me live images of my driveway, quiet and calm. My car remained untouched. Across the street, the sisters' lights were on, their curtains drawn tight. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I would always be there. Target. But now, I held the proof that would destroy them, and as I finally closed my eyes, a calm smile tugged at my lips. Tomorrow wouldn't just be another day. Tomorrow, justice would begin. The morning sun shone bright, but this time it felt different. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for weeks had lifted. I brewed my coffee without trembling hands, took a slow sip, and then looked out the window not with dread, but with anticipation. My ruined car still sat in the driveway like a wounded soldier, but today, it would become the symbol of something more. Justice. By mid-morning, 2 patrol cars rolled down the street, their blue and red lights flashing silently. I had expected just one officer, maybe a quiet follow-up visit, but instead the police came in force. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains and stepped onto porches, whispering and pointing. The hum of curiosity spread like wildfire, and before long half the block was watching. The Karen sisters were on their porch as usual, sipping coffee in their floral robes, smirking at me as if daring me to do something. But when the patrol car stopped in front of their house, their smiles faltered. The taller one stood abruptly, nearly spilling her mug. The shorter one squinted, confused, as the officers stepped out and approached their steps. "Good morning," one officer said firmly. "Are you the residents here?" The taller sister crossed her arms, her chin raised defiantly. "Yes." "What's this about?" The officer's voice didn't waver. "We have a report of vandalism, and we have video evidence connecting you both to the crime." The sisters froze. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy in the air. Then the shorter one laughed nervously. "Video? What video? We don't know what you're talking about." That was my cue. I stepped forward, holding my phone. "This video," I said, my voice steady. I tapped the screen, and the recording began to play. The sisters creeping in the night, scratching my car, smashing the door, laughing. Their voices rang out clearly, undeniable. The crowd of neighbors gasped, some whispering, others openly shaking their heads in disgust. Mrs. Wilkins from next door muttered, "I knew it." The sisters' faces drained of color. "That's fake," the taller one snapped, pointing at me. "He's making this up to frame us." The officer didn't flinch. "Ma'am, this video was captured by a secured device and verified. It's clear in time, and unless you'd like to provide an alibi, you're both under arrest for vandalism and destruction of property." The shorter sister's voice cracked. "This is ridiculous. We're the victims here. He harasses us, flaunts his car, makes us miserable. Harassment." I cut in, my voice sharp. "You destroyed my property. You laughed while you did it. And now the whole neighborhood, who knows exactly who you are." The murmurs from the watching neighbors grew louder. Some nodded in agreement, others glared openly at the sisters. It was as if years of quiet resentment had finally bubbled to the surface. The officers moved in. One pulled out a pair of handcuffs, while the taller sister shrieked, backing away. "You can't do this. We're respected members of this community." A voice from the crowd shouted, "Respect it. You've been terrorizing us for years." Another neighbor added, "About time someone stood up to you." The sisters' desperate denials grew shriller, their faces red with rage and panic, but the officers remained calm, professional, reading them their rights as they cuffed their wrists. The sight was almost surreal. The infamous Karen sisters, who had strutted around the neighborhood with smug superiority, now reduced to shouting and struggling like cornered animals. I should have felt triumphant, but what I felt was something deeper, relief. Watching them finally face consequences, I realized how much fear and frustration I had been carrying. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about reclaiming my peace, my dignity, my place in this community. As the officers guided the sisters toward the patrol car, the shorter one twisted her head toward me, her eyes blazing. "This isn't over. You'll regret this." I didn't flinch. I held her gaze, then said quietly, "No, you will." The officers pushed them gently into the back of the patrol car, their protests muffled by the closing doors. The flashing lights bathed the street in blue and red, a signal that justice had arrived at last. The crowd of neighbors began clapping, soft at first, then louder, until the entire block seemed to erupt in applause. I felt my face grow warm, not with embarrassment, but with something like pride. People patted my back, shook my hand, even thanked me for standing up when they hadn't dared to. Mrs. Wilkins leaned close, her voice kind. You did what we all wished we had the courage to do. You made them pay. I nodded, a lump in my throat. For the first time in weeks I felt lighter, as if a storm cloud had finally blown away. When the patrol cars drove off, taking the sisters with them, the street slowly emptied. People returned to their homes, still buzzing about what they had witnessed. I lingered outside, standing beside my wounded car, staring at the scratches and dents. They were still there, a reminder of the sisters' cruelty. But now, they didn't sting the same way. Soon repairs would fix the damage. What mattered was that justice had already started repairing something else. My spirit that evening. I received a call from the officer who had handled the arrest. He explained that the sisters would be facing charges for vandalism, trespassing, and property damage. On top of that, they would likely be ordered to cover the full cost of repairs. I thanked him, my voice steady but my heart surging with quiet satisfaction. As night fell, I sat on my porch for the first time in weeks, sipping tea and watching the stars prick the dark sky. Across the street, the Karen sisters' house sat dark and silent, its porch empty. No smirks, no laughter, no mocking voices. For once, the neighborhood was peaceful, and I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning of their regret. The neighborhood felt different in the days after the Karen sisters were taken away, quieter, lighter, as if the air itself had been scrubbed clean of the bitterness they carried with them. For years they had ruled the street with their venomous words, their constant complaints, and their sense of entitlement. But now, with their porch empty and their windows dark, the block felt like a community again. People stopped to chat, children played basketball in the driveways without being yelled at, and even the birds seemed to sing louder in the mornings. But for me, the journey wasn't over yet. My car, though still drivable, was a scarred reminder of what I had endured. Each scratch and dent whispered their cruelty. I arranged for repairs, and when the mechanic gave me the bill, I didn't flinch, because I knew exactly who would be paying for it. A week later I was summoned to court. I arrived dressed neatly, holding my evidence in a folder, though by now everyone knew it was undeniable. The sisters shuffled in, no longer wrapped in smugness but in shame. Their robes and coffee cups were replaced by wrinkled clothes and pale, tired faces. They looked smaller somehow, diminished. The sight of them, once so intimidating, now made me realize how pathetic they really were. The judge played the footage in the courtroom. The sound of their voices laughing as they vandalized my car echoed against the wooden walls. The sisters hung their heads, their earlier arrogance gone, when the judge looked at them sternly and announced their punishment: community service, fines, restitution for the damage, and a restraining order. They both flinched as though struck. You will pay for the full cost of repairs, the judge said firmly, and you will not approach or harass this man again. Do you understand? Their mumbled replies of yes were barely audible. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt taller, freer. Justice wasn't just a word anymore. It was real, and I had lived it. My neighbors congratulated me, some even clapping me on the back. Mrs. Wilkins hugged me tightly, whispering, "We owe you more than you know." When the repairs were finally complete, my car gleamed again, restored to the shining beauty it had been when I first brought it home. But this time it wasn't just a symbol of hard work, it was a symbol of resilience, of standing up against bullies, of fighting back when it mattered most. Every time I slid into the driver's seat, I felt a renewed sense of pride, not just in the car, but in myself. The sisters, meanwhile, became ghosts in the neighborhood. Word spread quickly of their humiliation, and their reputation crumbled. They avoided leaving their house unless absolutely necessary, and when they did, their eyes stayed glued to the ground, no longer daring to meet anyone's gaze. Their porch, once their throne of power, remained empty. The community changed too. With the sisters silenced, the street came alive. Neighbors organized a block party, children played freely, and laughter returned. One evening, as I sat on my porch with a glass of iced tea, I watched families gather and realized something profound. By standing up to the sisters, I hadn't just reclaimed my peace, I had helped restore peace for everyone. The sisters thought destroying my car would break me. They thought they could humiliate me into silence, but instead they exposed themselves for what they really were: bitter, powerless, and cruel. And in the end, they paid the price for their regret. As I drove through the neighborhood in my restored car, windows down and the wind rushing in, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: absolute freedom. The Karen sisters were a dark chapter in my life, but they were only that, a chapter. And now that chapter was closed.